Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you guys for joining us today. My name is Stacey Adams. I'm a lead project manager at the South Florida Water Management District, and I am the program manager for the Cooperative Funding Program. I'm also your moderator and host for today's webinar. This is the first of two informational webinars that we're going to be hosting for the DEP FY24 Alternative Water Supply Funding Program opportunity. The next webinar will be on Thursday, January 26th at 10 a.m. Currently, we have about 40 people on today's call. The webinar is being recorded, and we will post a link to our YouTube channel on the Cooperative Funding Program website. At the end of the presentation, I'll have further instructions when we go to do the question and answer. So let's get started with the overview. In 2019, when Governor DeSantis took office, he requested recurring annual funds for alternative water supply development. And over the last 4 legislative sessions, the governor and the legislature both recognize the importance of these projects in protecting Florida's natural systems and have allocated over $170 million statewide. On our website, you're going to find the guidelines, the application, the contact information, and example applications. I want to draw attention that new this year we've uploaded an acknowledgement form that needs to be signed by a person who could enter into a contract agreement if you're selected, and it needs to be signed on entity's letterhead and uploaded as a PDF. So in anticipation of alternative water supply funding being appropriated, we released an application on December 15th. This is the first of our 2 webinars. The application closes on March 2nd at exactly 4 o'clock. Please, please, please do not wait until 3:59 to try and upload your documents. The portal will close at 4 o'clock, and then you'll have to wait for FY25. During March and April, we have our internal review process. And in May, I will be going to the governing board for approval of the project list and then ultimate transmittal to DEP before May 31st. Who can apply? Pretty much any public or private entity, local governments, tribes, golf courses, etc. To be eligible for our program, you have to adhere to all application instructions, laws, and regulations. If you're a local government, you must have an adopted ordinance that comports with the district's year-round irrigation ordinance to be eligible. If you do not, your project application will not be moved forward in the review process. Users that are not eligible to apply is any single resident or homeowner who wants to do something such as retrofitting their irrigation system or switching out their indoor plumbing fixtures. If you're a permittee and you are out of compliance with a district or DEP permit, you will not be considered for funding. This is a reimbursement program. No one's guaranteed up to the full 50% funding. Applicants are responsible to move forward with a project with or without district or state funding. The anticipated dates that we put in our guidelines is the district's fiscal year, which would be October 1st, 2023, closing September 30th of 2024. Those dates are subject to change based on agreements between DEP and the district. Mainly, we want you to go by the start date to assist you with if you should apply for an application, a project for this fiscal year, if you could do it starting in fiscal year 24. Most of our current contracts have been anywhere from 12 to 36 months, depending on the project type. Allowable costs are towards the project identified in the application. Oops, sorry about that. Has to be construction or implementation. That starts on or after October 1st. Some of the non-allowable costs include anything done prior to the start date or after the funding period. If It's regular operations and maintenance, lobbying, and in-kind services. So the funding is available for 2 different project types. The first is alternative water supply, which is the increasing water supplies through development of non-traditional water sources and or storage that meets existing and future needs. Robert's going to go into the program more in a few slides. And the second is water conservation. So those are any projects that use hardware or technology to increase water use efficiency. And Rosenis will be discussing those specific items later on. As part of the DEP AWS guidance document, they requested that all the districts provide a prioritized list of projects based on some of the following considerations. It should provide regional benefits. Does it support an MFL water body? Are there any other benefits such as water quality or flood control? Projects need to be shovel ready. If your project is not ready to be implemented or begin construction, you probably should wait to apply. If you have any questions, be happy to answer those. And all projects need to undergo a cost-benefit analysis. Historically, the program governing board priorities have considered that applicants must be within the district boundaries, or a project provides benefits to our district. It has to be AWS or conservation. That means no O&M, design, engineering, permitting, or pilot projects. This project should support the district mission and or an approved water supply plan. We do prioritize projects based on regional or resource considerations, such as a restricted allocation area. And to be more selective about entities who receive our grant funding, the governing board approved an eligibility requirement that local governments must have enacted a local water conservation irrigation ordinance that restricts the times and days irrigation is allowed. So in a similar manner, our governing board believed it was advantageous to consider the status of local government water supply facilities work plans as part of our cooperative funding process. So the district has multiple areas with water resource limitations. We develop our regional water supply plans that identify water supply options and strategies to meet a 20-year planning horizon at a regional level. So to integrate water supply planning at the local level, local governments are required to update their water supply facilities work plans within 18 months of an approved water supply plan. So by updating their local work plans, they demonstrate how they're planning for and developing projects to meet their future water needs. And those updated work plans establish a firm linkage with our approved water supply plans. For FY24, your work plan status is a cost share process consideration, but starting in fiscal year 25, it will become an eligibility requirement for you to be considered for funding. This does not apply to private entities, only local governments. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Robert Rondeverstraat, who is our resource reuse coordinator, to talk about alternative water supply.
Thank you, Stacy. Good afternoon, everyone. As Stacy said, my name is Robert Rondeverstraat, and I'm the AWS Reuse Coordinator, the South Florida Water Management District. So the Alternative Water Supply Program supports projects that increase water supplies through the development of non-traditional water sources, and those include brackish water, salt water, reclaimed water, excess surface or storm water, and any other source that's designated as a non-traditional source in a regional water supply plan. And you'll notice that storage for those types of sources is included. And as Stacy said, I'd like to reiterate, operations and maintenance projects, even if they are for a non-traditional source, are not included in this program type. Okay. Earlier, as Stacy discussed, there are some general considerations that the FDEP has outlined. But now when we're talking about AWS projects, there are a few extras, and those are as follows. They include projects that, whether or not the project reduces dependence on traditional sources, whether the project supports the goals and objectives of our regional water supply plans, if the project supports ocean outfall legislation, and if the project's contribution is located in a resource-limited area. Waiting for the slide to advance. There we go. Sorry about that. The allowable AWS costs. Well, first, let's back up and just say, as previously discussed, this is for construction of AWS projects, but not all water supply construction projects are AWS. So the allowable AWS costs include transmission lines for brackish or saltwater sources, et cetera, reclaimed water pipelines, pump stations, or storage, RO trains, pump and equipment, ASR wells, and brackish and production wells, and concentrate disposal wells as well. There we go. Non-allowable AWS costs include those associated with the design phase, permitting, any videos of as-built designs of the construction, construction of finished water projects, such as storage tanks or transmission lines, et cetera, end user connections, and backup generators. So there are more examples of non-allowable costs that are in the guidance document that's on the website, and I would encourage any potential applicant to review the guidance document in full, and particularly the allowable and non-allowable costs. So the thing I would say in a nutshell for the AWS portion of the cooperative funding program is that it's for the construction of projects that increase water supply by developing non-traditional sources of water. And that concludes my portion of the presentation. I'll turn it over to Rosinis Colon.
Thank you, Robert. As Stacy mentioned before, the water conservation component of the cooperative funding program seeks to support projects that improve water use efficiency and conservation. These projects can target an individual property, a business, a farm or nursery, or utilities, infrastructures, and operations. Projects that use hardware or technology to increase water use efficiency are eligible for consideration. And these projects can be in the form of a rebate program for residents and businesses managed by a sponsoring entity such as a utility, a local government agency, or even a non-governmental organization. Some examples of projects that have been funded in the past are high efficiency indoor fixtures or appliances retrofits, automatic flushing devices, irrigation retrofits or rebates, agricultural or nursery irrigation efficiency improvements, and industrial, commercial, and institutional projects such as cooling tower retrofits. Some of the elements that are considered in the review process are the water source being conserved, quantity of water saved, quality and detail of project application. Is it a project that has environmental benefits and benefits the community? And one heavily considered item is cost effectiveness, which is a measure of how much money is spent to save 1,000 gallons of water. Focusing on this allows the district to stretch its dollars and get the most bang for each buck, while also encouraging applicants to design their projects to be as cost-effective and efficient as possible. Conservation projects should have a cost effectiveness equal to or less than $6 per 1,000 gallons to be considered. Now we'll talk about the two biggest categories of water conservation projects, urban and agricultural. The first category, urban conservation projects, can be divided into indoor and outdoor projects and usually target devices and systems in existing properties, like indoor fixtures and water-using appliances, cooling towers, and HVAC systems. Our irrigation controllers, sensors, spray bodies, and system audits. Water conservation projects in new construction can also be considered if the builder is working towards a Florida Water Star certification. You can learn more about the Florida Water Star program by visiting the website www.floridawaterstar.com. Some examples for urban conservation projects are the installation of submeters, cooling tower water use efficiency upgrades, advanced meter analytics software, online customer portals directly related to water conservation, among others. Utilities are also encouraged to consider projects that will improve the efficiency of their operations. We are open to consider other types of technology or hardware that are not listed here, but improve water use efficiency. Applicants should be aware that some of the projects are not eligible for funding. For example, indoor fixtures for new construction, unless they're part of a Florida Water Star certification program, as we mentioned before. Automatic meter reading infrastructure or hardware like antennas, relays, meters, or decoders are not eligible. Wireless urinals or projects that target practices consider operations and maintenance. Installation of new irrigation systems or expansions for existing irrigation systems are not eligible, nor is replacement landscaping. In the second category, we'll discuss agricultural and nursery operations, and these can also be divided into two groups. The first one includes projects that convert irrigation systems into more efficient ones, like taking a flood irrigation system and converting it to an overhead irrigation system. And the other group includes projects that help improve irrigation management equipment, like installing weather stations, wireless telemetry, or soil moisture probes. Some other examples of agricultural projects are replacing sprinkler heads with more efficient ones, pump system automation, and variable frequency drive retrofits on existing pumps or wells. Other technology or hardware not listed here could also be considered if it improves water use efficiency. Finally, here we can see some examples for agricultural projects that would not be eligible for funding. In general, projects that seek to install new irrigation systems or expand existing systems are not eligible. Neither are culverts or water control structures, replacing old emitters with new ones of the same efficiency or flow rating, new pumps, new filters, fertilization or disinfection hardware or materials, freeze protection materials, construction of tailwater ponds or reservoirs, or the installation of mainline pipes for surface water delivery. Essentially, this covers the basics for the water conservation component of this cooperative funding program, but potential applicants are strongly encouraged to review the program guidelines to be sure their projects meet all applicable standards and requirements. With that, I'm going to turn the presentation back to Stacy so she can review the program's website.
Okay, hopefully everyone has visited our cooperative funding website. So these are just a couple screenshots to make sure you found the right page of the FY24 program. So links to all of our documents. are included in the second picture on this slide. But if you haven't signed up for our notification emails, I highly encourage you. In the paragraph right before the contact information, there's a thing that says, please click here to subscribe. That you click on that link and subscribe, and you can choose water supply planning and I believe cooperative and regional opportunities, and you will get those email notifications when we send them out. Project contacts are Robert, Rosenis, myself, and also Jim Harmon. We can answer any AWS or water conservation questions. If you have AWS, please refer those to Robert or myself. And conservation, you can either contact Jim, Rosenis, or myself. Now, once you've downloaded the application, you've reviewed the guidelines, and you're ready to submit your application and your acknowledgement form and any other documents you would like us to see. You're going to go above the list of documents where it says download and it says complete the online submission form. You're going to click that link and it's going to open up a new tab for you for the online submission form. All of these fields are required, including the latitude and longitude. If you're not sure what that is, you can click on the click here to enter your address and it'll populate the lat longs in decimal degrees for you. I want to encourage everyone to please include a direct contact email address and phone number in your application as well as your submission form. This is if I have any questions regarding your application. If I get a generic email such as info@ or a customer service information line, I can't resolve comments or concerns or additional information with your application prior to it being moved in the review process. So that will delay that. So I highly encourage you to make sure you get me contact information. So this last item is not on our website, but it refers to AWS applicants. If you're water conservation, you can disregard this slide. So in the AWS application, we have a table 2, which is a deliverable breakdown. And what I wanted to provide is a quick overview of something that's a generic deliverable schedule that is not as helpful during the review process of the project, and giving an example of what we would prefer to see. And if you have any questions, again, you can reach out to Robert or myself. So as you can see in the generic example, task 1, 2, and 3, those are items that don't have any construction costs related to them, and those are items that could be included in the scope of work text, so you don't actually have to put them in table 2. But the generic table 4 item above that says production wells and raw water mains has been split out into 2 separate tasks. Down below that says you're constructing 2 1 million gallon per day production wells and 4,500 linear feet of transmission main. And also to help with our viewers, instead of facility construction, it shows that you're doing site work and yard piping and the structure itself, RO skids, and electrical systems. And it gives a better breakdown. You can also detail this in the scope of work section. So it's just a tip I wanted to give for AWS applicants to help us with the review process. So at this time, if you want to ask any questions or provide any comments, if you're participating via Zoom, use the raise hand feature. And if you're just participating via phone, do *9 will raise your hand, and *6 will mute and unmute your line. When I do call on you, I would ask that you please state your full name and your affiliation prior to asking any questions or providing any comments. With that, the first person I see is Ashley Levine, and I apologize if I mess up anybody's names.
Oh, it's me. There, sorry about that. I think this is Rachel Tennant from Fort Pierce Utilities Authority. I think I might have used Ashley's link and confused us both. Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yes, Rachel, go ahead.
Oh. Sorry, Stacy. I have a question. I noticed a couple of times that the presentation mentioned that construction has to begin on or after October 1st. And for folks like us who have a larger project, where we're relocating a wastewater treatment plant, but there's a piece of it that's going to be a big reclaimed water sort of thing for the power plant next door. Is that still something we can apply for, even though technically construction of the larger effort would have already begun?
That is a great question. Yes. So especially our large AWS projects, we know that they're phased out over several years. So what we're looking for is when whatever you put in the application is items that you could get done within the funding period. So if you know you've already constructed like the facility itself, you've done all the yard piping, site work, that kind of stuff, that's not something you would put in your application for fiscal year 24. You would put the items that you would actually be installing during that fiscal year. We do have, for AWS applicants, we have a table 1 that kind of gives you a breakdown for the different fiscal years. I think it's 5 that you can space out what you think you're going to be doing. And then table 2 is what you would be doing within that current fiscal year application.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, all phase projects can be funded. I do have a couple instances where it's been some larger water conservation projects where they did one phase 1 year, but they're going to come in and ask for phase 2 or phase 3 for their other project. Those have been eligible for funding consideration as well.
Okay.
Did that answer?
Yes.
Go ahead.
There's a part 2. So we have it broken down as far as what it will cost to put the alternative water supply piece in. But some of those pieces may start before October. And what I'm hearing is just so long as they don't get included in the budget of requested funding, it's fine.
Yes.
Okay.
You can include portions of it, because I'm dealing with that with some active projects. Mm-hmm. About what was maybe purchased beforehand, but the installation would be considered, but not the purchase. So okay. There are there's negotiable things that can be put on there. So if you want to get into specifics, we can handle that offline.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, next up is ArborTrace. We can't hear you if you're trying to speak. It looks like we're having technical difficulties with ArborTrace, so I'm going to call on Jackie May.
Hi, good afternoon. How are you?
Wonderful. How are you?
Good, thank you. I'm with the City of Stuart, and in the past, we had received some funding, which we are grateful for, and we learned in 2021 and 2020 that the emphasis was going to be for regional projects, and I see that that is still mentioned on your slide over governing board priorities. I'm just curious, given the local government water supply facilities work plan status consideration, would that give us a boost in terms of eligibility because we are a local government, or does the regional preference still hold?
There are a lot of variables that we look at when we review applications. For the state would like us to look at regional benefits in nature. A lot of projects that we have are not regional in nature. There are some things in statute that water management districts are required to provide funding for, or at least give higher priority to. So it all depends on the applications that we receive and where you are in the process. This year, in regards to the water supply facility work plans, that's just like a bonus point situation for this year.
Okay.
It doesn't really give you that big of an advantage, but
Okay.
if we had 10 local governments that applied and only one had a water supply facilities work plan, then that would probably factor into our discussions.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Elizabeth Natali.
Yes, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. I'm with Parole Engineers. I have a question on project eligibility for water conservation funding. You mentioned it was mentioned during the presentation that replacement of landscaping is not allowed. What about turf replacement?
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite understand your question. I'm hearing some feedback.
So the replacement of landscaping is not allowed, but what about programs such as turf replacement, cash for grass, this kind of programs? Is that something that would be allowed?
For our program, no, we don't do turf replacements or any type of landscaping.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The next, we have a caller. Last four digits are 555.
Hello, this is Mark from Arbor Trace. Sorry, we had a problem with our TV not picking up our voice. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
All right. Our question is regarding timelines. We understand, the timeline to submit and the timeline that it's reviewed, but at what date would the association know if they were approved for funding?
So the two-step process would be the first, you're going to see if you're on the above the line, if you're eligible for funding consideration on the project approval list. That will go in May to the governing board for approval. Then the next step in the process is that we submit our prioritized list that's been approved by our governing board to DEP. And then it all depends on their timeline. I could hear as early as September, or I could hear as late as January. It just depends on the budgeting cycle and where the funds are coming from. So typically they're trying to get it done before the fiscal year starts, but a lot of our projects have been retroactive, so they do go back to the fiscal year start, because we've had concerns with folks in the past when they've already started the project, but those costs were captured and were allowable by the DEP contracting.
So we would know if we qualified in May, and if we weren't notified by, let's say, November 1st, we could go ahead and start the project even without knowing if we're getting any funding. I mean,
well, a lot of folks, what they will do, Mark, is they'll call me, or they'll continue to check the website, or they'll call Rosenis, Robert, or Jim and ask for information. And usually I will try and give you the best information that I have at that time. Most people, once you receive a letter, so we will send an email via a letter via email. So it'll either be an award letter, a non-award letter, or your project did not meet program considerations. That will be after we know who received funding, and it'll say you've gotten the money, it's going to cover expenditures for this, and most people do wait for that notification before they start. But others are ongoing projects, so they continue with their rebate programs or so forth, regardless of our funding.
Okay, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
All right, Marla has a question, if we may, please.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi, Stacey. It's
Hi
Marla
there.
Fisher. Is that okay? Hi
Yes,
there.
ma'am.
If I, two just definitions that I'd like to have. One, in looking at your materials, you indicate that you'd like to have things inspected by a trained professional. Is that someone that is certified by the Irrigation Association? Could you possibly define trained professional?
I am going to let Rosenis answer that question.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, would this be for water conservation? Is this an irrigation system?
Yes. Yes, this is
Yes,
water
it would be
conservation, bottom CFP guidelines, page 11.
Yes, so an irrigation professional would have, it would be certified and have an active license. So it would be an irrigation constructor that is registered.
Does that mean they have to have the CLIA?
Yeah, does that mean that they need to be CLIA?
Let me see. Maybe Jim or Robert can help me with that.
This is Jim. Hopefully you can hear me. I mean, I would say that our preference would be that they're licensed. You know, that might be something that we could discuss later on if your project is selected. Obviously, the intent is to not have somebody that doesn't know anything about irrigation out there doing the work. You know, it doesn't mean that they necessarily have to be licensed in that regard, because there are other irrigation professionals that might be doing audits, say from like IFAS or the university or other places that are certain that have got the education experience to do this type of work. But we really don't want it to be like in-house staff unless they've been trained and licensed, or somebody just, you know, unlicensed doing the work, basically.
Knowledgeable professionals, but not. Okay. So I thank you for that. And if I may, one other definition that I'd like to have, again, from your CFP guidelines on page 14, the term restricted allocation area as it pertains to potable water.
Jim?
Yeah, those are areas that have been designated by the district for water use permitting as being restricted. And typically, you know, we would know where those areas are. If that's part of the application, we can help you fill that out.
Okay.
Most of the lower East Coast is restricted. There's other restricted areas, depending on source throughout the district. That's something we can help you with. The definition would actually be in our water use rules in 40E-2. But if you're unsure of that, we can let you know if you're unsure if you're in an area or not.
Okay. That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next raised hand I see is Pauline Bellavance.
Okay, can you hear me, Stacy?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much for doing this presentation. And as you know, this is the first time for ourselves from Osprey Cove condominiums applying for this funding. And I wondered, you talked a lot about the AWS projects, but are you going to do any detail on water conservation projects in general? As you know, we're looking to replace toilets.
So most of, oh, go ahead.
Yep, no, go ahead.
So most of our water conservation application information is pretty straightforward as far as what you guys are doing if you're going to retrofit your entire facility with indoor retrofits with the new efficient hardware. And irrigation systems, usually most of those have included information from an irrigation consultant where they've helped provide those calculations. And we don't run into a lot of issues where we have to resolve them for water conservation type project applications that were received. It's more the AWS that those can get kind of tricky.
Okay.
So we can definitely work with you offline if you have some specific concerns with the application.
That's perfect. That actually would be very helpful, and I really appreciate your availability of yourself and your team, because that's really helpful. There are some, like under the estimated water savings, I think it's 5A and 5B, that we may reach out to you for some clarification and making sure we are gathering that data correctly.
Absolutely, we're more than happy to assist with if any other applicants are applying for water conservation and you're hung up on the water savings calculator tabs, which is, as she mentioned, is 5A and 5B, at least on the urban side. I don't know if it's different for the ag application. We're happy to walk through any of those issues. Rosenis, Jim, or myself would be happy to assist.
Okay, that's perfect. And basically for the, like, say the toilets, and I know it seems like a small project compared to some of the folks that are talking about major, irrigation, but they all have to be water sense. Is that, I'm understanding that correctly?
Yes, ma'am. And if I am incorrect, Rosenis can correct me.
Oh, you are correct.
Perfect. Okay. Again, Stacy, thank you so much. I'm sure we will be in touch. I appreciate your help with this.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, I don't see any other raised hands at this time. Going to give everybody just one last opportunity if you have questions. Okay, with that, I'm going to thank our speakers and everyone who participated in today's webinar. Just a reminder, we are recording this and a YouTube link will be posted on our CFP website. So thanks again, and everyone have a wonderful afternoon.